So something else I have been playing that I'll give a bit more time to. Astrobot, which we've already mentioned, despite being a big AAA first-party release, is arguably the type of thing you'd expect me to have played. It's quite a me game in that sense. But what would you say, other than, yes, I know you texted about this a couple of weeks ago, if I told you I'd also been playing 2018's God of War?
I'd say, wow, if this was 2 weeks ago, I'd be very surprised to hear this.
I'd be absolutely shocked. This is obviously another AAA first-party Sony release, represented, as you've already mentioned as well, brilliantly in Astrobot. But it's also in a genre and style that generally is a lot less in my wheelhouse than a bright, day-glow, inventive platformer. So, again, like I've done a few times recently, it's always nice to surprise and shock. But God of War is a game that you spoke about at length when it slammed into your top 100 list during our addendum season.
Yeah.
I've heard lots of people talk about it over the years. I've seen footage of it 1,000 times, but I just never thought it would really be for me. Like, looking at that footage, I always got the impression that it was a game of quite technical, almost like Souls-like combat. I thought it would have quite linear environments. I thought it would have, obviously, the expected PlayStation Studios single-player story polish that I've never really connected with. But because I am a sucker for a bargain, and I'm a sucker for adding things to my Steam library to play on the deck, when God of War dropped to something like 12 quid in a sale, I thought, even if I only play it for an hour, if I get an hour's ultra fidelity hacking and slashing, it's probably worth it at that price. And now I'm about 8 hours in. So I've enjoyed it way more than that.
There we go.
And of an evening, Georgia will frequently ask if I'm playing Dad of War. And it's been quite nice to have an experience like that she's wanted to kind of share in a little bit as well. Because, it does, as I've said, it ticks the PlayStation Studios prestige storytelling box. But I think it's doing a lot more than just that, which is why I've kind of stuck at it a bit more. The combat is way more inviting and exciting than I was expecting. And again, you described it really nicely, but to actually play it, it's got really weighty, kind of like Christopher Nolan's Batman style thrust with every kick and slash. It feels heavy. And it's also really balanced from a play perspective, which I appreciated because, as I've said multiple times in this show, I'm pretty shit at most games. So there is timing, there are combos, there's enemy weaknesses and resistances and everything else. But on the regular difficulty, it's also very doable, even if you are just a scrub who's just spamming the same attack over and over like me. So I can get through these big encounters and feel really good, even if I'm not playing that well. You're obviously going to do better with more skill. You're obviously going to have more fun at higher difficulties with more skill, but you won't outright fail with less. And I think that's quite a fine line to kind of get right in a game like this. Many of the harder combat challenges in God of War as well are essentially like optional bits of content, the kind of like rift encounters and things like that. So if I find myself suddenly really clicking with the way it all works, I know I can revisit some of them later to show off my chops. But, then I get more game to play, so it's win-win. I remember when this came out, the father-son relationship between Kratos and Atreus got both a lot of praise and also quite a lot of stick at the same time. And, the silly Dad of War joke I mentioned is not George's alone. It was kind of doing the rounds at the time. But playing this a few years out of relevancy, though, in terms of release at least, and at this particular time in my life, it's made me think and appreciate his storytelling a little differently, I think, than if I'd played it back when it was a bit more contemporary. A lot of media has explored this kind of parent-child bond, whether by blood like this or in loco parentis in something like Telltale's The Walking Dead. And there's a definite reason for that, because the idea of caring for or raising another is a very human instinct and desire. And at this stage of my life, I'm in my late 30s, I'm starting to think and plan for the next step in my own relationship and starting a family. It does hit with more relevancy. And not directly, in that I hope I won't be as guarded a parent as Kratos is, certainly in the early stages of this game. And, I hope I wouldn't struggle with the tenderness and intimacy in the way that he does for his own kind of worldview and fears and coping strategies. But all new prospective or planning parents do so with like a bubble of unknowing. And there are things that you can discuss, and there are things that you can infer with your partner. There are lines in the sand you might draw out. But when it comes to it, I think there's a big aspect of survival to parenthood, at least as I observe it in other people. And that sort of feeling is very literal in God of War, because obviously Kratos and Atreus are having to fight off trolls and negotiate tough landscapes and everything. But also metaphorically, because Kratos is having to adapt to this role with his son, having lost his own partner and Atreus' mother and everything else. And it's like there is something to deal with there for him. And he's learning his way, just as Atreus is learning to survive in the wilds as well. once you add in all the cool environmental puzzles and hidden collectibles and adaptive AI and combat encounters and blah, 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 it's the highly polished AAA first-party Sony prestige single-player open-world game, as all of them are. But it's landing for me in a way I wasn't expecting by virtue of the thematic dressing that holds this all together. And by that, I don't mean Midgard or like the Norse mythology stuff that's powering it, but by it being about family and this uneasy bond between the main characters. And I've really enjoyed that far more than I thought I would. And again, probably because of just where my headspace is now as a 37-year-old man negotiating what comes next in my life. So yeah, I really like it. I hope to play more. It would be nice if I could actually get through it and finish it, but I know it's quite an investment, at least in terms of how I play games normally, especially now that I'm back at school. But still, I am having a nice time. Well done, Sony. So another good one. Put it on the list.
Yeah. It is a very, very good game. I can't tell you how disappointed I was with God of War Ragnarok that it just, I don't know, like it didn't. If God of War Ragnarok was the first game, I probably would have gone, oh wow, this is amazing. But it just felt like playing the same game again.
Yeah, I've got that impression. Like again, from now that having played a few hours of God of War, the footage I've seen of Ragnarok does feel like it's just a snowier, crisper version of that, isn't it? Doing the same thing, really.
Still a lot of corridors.